We are now continuing to the next session. The third panel is on the topic of technology and energy transition. The three panelists are Professor VGR Chandran from University of Malaya, Professor Llewellyn Hughes from Australian National University, and Professor Daiji Shao from Academia Sinica. The two discussants for this panel are Tianji Chen, the Ho Jingtui Chair Professor, Academic Advisor of Taipei School of Economics and Political Science of National Tsinghua University, and Professor Zilun Lin from National Taiwan University. The chair of this panel is Dr. Eugene Jang, the Ambassador at Large of Taiwan ROC and Chairman and President of Taiwan Institute for Sustainable Energy. Now, let us welcome Dr. Jang.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, my name is Eugene Chen. I'm right now the chairman and president of Taiwan Institute for Sustainable Energy. Meantime, I also in charge of 3 different NGOs, most of them as independent NGO. We work for SDGs, UN's SDGs, sustainable energy, and climate change, and also the biodiversity. So it is my great honor to chair this afternoon's session. Now we are going to the panel 3. That's the quite urgent issue in this country and all over the world, the technology and energy transition. And we have the great honor. We have 3 distinguished panelists and 2 also distinguished discussants from Taiwan. So the first one, we'd like to invite Professor VGR Chandran from University of Malaysia. He is a professor of industrial development of the Department of Development Studies, Faculty of the Business and Economics, University of Malaya. He has extensive field work in the Asia region, focusing on the industrial development, social innovation, and the non-tariff measures, impacting global value chains integration. He's been well recognized. He is the recipient of the multiple national and international awards, including the Horizon 2020 grant and excellence awards from the Emirate and Elsevier. Today, his topic will be present here is changing structure of the global value chain of the solar industry in Malaya and its implications. Okay, please, Professor Chandran.
Thank you very much, Chair. And first of all, let me thank the TSEF for the invitation. It's a great honor to be here in terms of delivering some of the insights that we have from Malaysia in the context of solar industry. So what I'm going to speak about, do we have the slides? Can I have the control? Do you have a controller? So I'm going to briefly discuss a bit on the changing structure of the global value chain of the solar industry in Malaysia and its implication. So it's more of looking from the viewpoint of the supply chain, the global supply chain perspective, thinking about what are the company's strategies to move forward and how government-company relationship happens within this context. Because I think most of the time when we talk about geopolitics just now, it is too macro, it's too high level. But also we need to consider about what are the company's strategy to tackle some of this narrative that we have in terms of even anti-dumping laws or even tariff hike by the counterparts, right? So in that context, we are looking into how institution plays a role and the role of the state and the businesses and how that shapes the whole value chain. So if I may, so I'm putting that in context so that we can understand how at firm level things are happening. Yeah. So for the government, for the country level, there's a renewed interest in terms of green industrial policy. That is for sure. But the conceptualization of industry policy, green industry policy, is still immature. I mean, it's still in a very early stage, infant stage, about how do we define green industry policy. But of course, the idea was to move into some of the emerging industries, which is very important for the country's progress. Being one is the solar industry, the renewable energy industry. So in that context, what happened for Malaysia is that during 1997, after the crisis, we saw a lot of decline in the share of manufacturing. And because of that, the government has an interest in renewing some of the new industries, emerging industries, as a source of new growth. So given that, solar industry was targeted as one of the sector for planning purpose. The reason being because we already have a very strong base of E&E sectors within Malaysia. So the transition will be easier in terms of even supplying human capital and other investment in perspective to move forward in terms of how we could build a new growth sectors for the country so that we can keep the competitiveness alive in a longer period of time. Solar industry is being one of it, but we also have targeted few other industries within the context of the policymakers. So therefore, I mean, it's very critical for us to understand how this is being built within Malaysia, what was the thinking of the policymakers at that point of time, and how do they really build the whole ecosystem. So when they started off building solar industry, what they thought of is to build the whole ecosystem. So that is the experience that they got from the past 30 years of E&E sectors. So they try to fix out the puzzles about where to bring the foreign direct investment, where do we encourage more local investment, domestic investment, so that we can fix up the whole ecosystem and move forward in terms of being competitive. Of course, they could not have predicted the geopolitics now during that time of engagement. Yeah. So, so in that case, I'm just giving us some context in terms of the country. Malaysia is a very small, open economy which relies on exports. Trade has been very instrumental for Malaysia in that sense, even in driving the GDP growth. So if you're talking about GDP per capita income in that sense, yeah. And I mean, the manufacturing sector itself contributes largely to the exports. And E&E sector contributes about 38% of the total exports. And it is one of the source of trade surpluses for Malaysia. So it's being a very important sector. And in that process, what Malaysia have taken as a strategy was to use foreign direct investment and also to attract more multinational companies. So this is similar to Singapore in that context. And they wanted to move into strategizing the export-oriented industrialization strategies. So that is, I mean, very pertinent for Malaysia because then trade becomes so important because the domestic market is so small for us to move forward, or even to create the needed demand for companies to expand. Right. So that when we put that in perspective, then trade policy becomes an important element. So the policymakers have understood this well. But here, when we talk about trade policy, is also the global policy in that sense, and also the domestic policy. So we took an approach where liberalization has been seen as one of the drivers for growth, and also drivers to even improve the competitiveness of the industry. So in that nature, we have specific institutions which promotes investment. So that is by MITI, Ministry of International Trade. Specifically, we have an agency under MITI, which is called as Malaysian Industry Development Authority, who go and promotes and bring back foreign direct investment to Malaysia. So the liberalization of that policy has given a lot of inputs in terms of how do we move forward within the context of the industry itself. Yeah. Of course, US-China trade tension has given us some opportunity whereby there's a redirection of foreign direct investment into Malaysia. I think in the morning we saw a lot of data sets which shows that Malaysia is one of the beneficiaries of this investment. So we have therefore attracted a lot of Chinese manufacturers as well within various sectors, and one being the solar industry itself. So the trade policy, domestic trade policy, is more of giving more fiscal incentives, tax breaks, and also putting those companies within the export-oriented zones where they can enjoy better facilities and infrastructure in that sense. So that's a typical argument in terms of how do we attract foreign direct investment within the country. Yeah. So that has been traditional approach, but of course that has built up your capacity to export to various destinations. But at the same time, there are some drawbacks within the context of export processing zones kind of regulation that we have, because it may not have a spillover effect for domestic firms. And regardless of ownership, so when you talk about China or even other countries who are investing in Malaysia, we see largely very small or limited spillovers for local companies in that sense. Yeah. What boils back here is the policy instruments that you use in terms of how do you get the best out of this foreign direct investment. So it's a policy choices that you pick up as a policymaker, and then how do you instrumentalize those policies to ensure that there are some spillover effects to the local firms. So that is very clear. So regardless of ownership, everyone will try to protect the core technologies without having even technology transfer, which is very limited. Right? So in that sense, I think policymakers need to be smart enough in terms of how do we operationalize the context of foreign direct investment to have a better spillover effect to the other companies. Yeah. Of course, when we analyze the trade reduction within this context, there's an implication there. When you saw the solar panel per se, then we see zero tariffs. Yeah? Of course, now US is trying to put tariff for solar panels and so on. But if you look at components, then the story is different. At component level, tariff is still there, right? Batteries or even other components that goes into the whole system of the solar operation. Right, so I think what we have not done well is look into the tariff systems at a component level to see how that limits trade within countries. Yeah, because that has an implication about whether you want to integrate the whole system within the industry or whether you want to disintegrate. Yeah, and many of the industries now that we are observing is they are not fragmented; they are more integrated, and they are more integrated within manufacturing and services right now. Because services provide you better margins than compared to manufacturing. And trade in services are increasing along the way. And there's an argument that developing countries has more role in services now because the capex requirement for services is much lesser than compared to manufacturing. So if we can take that advantage in terms of trade in services, then there's more opportunity for smaller countries or even the developing countries. Because all you need is human capital, right? So the human capital can really allow you to progress in that sense. Yeah. So I think when we take the supply chain perspective, then we can break it up and see where the values are. So when you understand the value better, then we can talk about what is the consequences of geopolitics in this value chain, right? So without taking that, then we are lumping up everything, and then we are trying to say that China is bad in terms of investment, then therefore it will be having an implication for other countries as well. So I think we have to deep dive into seeing even smaller components within the industry and how that benefits. Yeah. So we mapped up some of the value chain. So this is what happens in 2013 after the government has promoted industrialization. So sorry. So industrialization. Process, okay, for the solar industry. So if you look at the module value chain, then it starts from raw materials until the end. That's the module production. Of course, there are different players within the industry, and those industries, the upstream industries, are very limited number of players. Then if you go to the module producers, then you have number of players there as well. But the structure has changed after the anti-dumping law and so forth, where you have more Chinese firms coming into the play. Right? But you have to also do not ignore the other players within the context of the value chain. There is a balance of system, and we have system integrators, and then we also have supporting industries which can support some of this progress of the industry itself. Yeah. So like chemical industry, Malaysia is very strong in chemical. The ownership structure is about 60-40, so 60 local firms and then 40 foreign firms, because we do have these national energy producers who are also involved in chemical extractions and other things. And because of the development of the module supply chain, what happens in Malaysia is that there's a lot of opportunity for us to build capacity as a system integrators. And now we have more domestic firms as well, being a system integrator, not only giving services to the domestic market, but also they're venturing outside. So they went to India, for instance, and they set up power plants, and energy systems, giving those kind of services at large. Yeah? So there's a lot of capacity building in this context if you think about how do we create values in other part of the value chain. So that is very instrumental. Yeah? So again, if you look at the module value chain, then it is more integrated, right? LONGi has the most extensive integration, right, from ignite to module production. And there's some form of collaboration between even polysilicon producers and also Chinese firms within this context. So it's basically a business strategy where they think about how do we maximize value within the context of the industry itself, right? So even if, say so, there's a sanction to Chinese firms by the US, the industry that will be impacted will be more of the module chain, module producers. But you may have opportunities in other areas. And again, how do we respond to those shocks depends on what is the state of the government's policy and how industry is tackling those shocks, right? So it's kind of negotiation. Whether it will create opportunity, it depends, right? If the company strategy is to diversify market, then it may create a lot of other opportunities for Malaysia. So it's kind of state business relationship that we need to look into and then see how we can best position this kind of strategies to move forward. Yeah. Of course, other areas as I speak just now can also provide you a value for movement. Yeah. Because at the end, I think it's about building the competitiveness so that, being a small economies, we can strive to see how we can balance the growth of the industry itself as per se. Yeah? Being that, because that investment don't come in every aspect of the value chain, so we have to source it out from others as well. And if you look at the evolution, so I'm just showing you, so we started this in 2010, and we really did a very longitudinal kind of engagement, tracking the firms over the years. So you can see that there is a change in terms of the solar PV industry evolution. The players have changed. In the early 2013, we had few Malaysian firms who are producing modules, but they have disappeared after that because of the fierce competition that they had, and because they could not engage in expanding the market further, right? So this evolution shows you how things have changed structurally within the players in the module value chain, and I think going back to the earlier slide. So if you look at the whole chain, the downstream, if you want to build the downstream industry, what matters is not trade policy. What matters is the energy policy and other related policies. In Malaysia, the energy producing company is a state-owned company. So because you can't break through that structure, it's very difficult for others to tap into the grid to provide renewable energy. So that limits the progress of the downstream industry. So if you have more kind of openness in terms of grid and other things, then it makes more sense for the downstream players to build their capacity to provide energy for the domestic market. So in many cases, in many of the developing countries, the energy producing company is a state-owned company, which is monopolized. So it's not easy to break that structure in terms of creating more competition and providing renewable energy. So that is the reason why in Malaysia, the renewable energy uptake is still low, because we are not encouraging alternative energy in that sense. So the state themselves are moving into producing renewable energy, but their approach is to take a large solar farm approach in terms of providing energy. So they were talking about more about energy security within the country rather than moving into distributed energy in that sense. Yeah. So there's a lot of trade-offs that you need to look into because of the policy environment that we have. Yeah. So of course, in building all this, science, technology, human capital policy are very critical. So how do you drive your S&T policies towards providing support to be more innovative, to come up with technological innovation, for instance, and so on. So that binds well with also the human capital policy. So if you don't coordinate this well, then it's very difficult. So it's not only the trade policy that affects the whole industrialization process in this context, but also other elements. Even in terms of bringing foreign direct investment, so what matters is some of this environment, institutional environment that need to be favorable enough for you to drive industrialization process. Yeah. So I'm giving you some insights from the lessons of Malaysia in this context, and it's quite striking to see that different policies play different roles within the context of building the industry itself. Yeah. So of course, geopolitics can be one threat, but again, how do we also coordinate other policies to ensure that other part of the value chain can be still competitive enough for us to move forward? Yeah. Okay. So these are some of the things that I've just said just now. So experimentation of energy policies, and how do you use that as an instrument to move forward some of the downstream players, and also the investment in that context. Sometimes there be selective mission-driven targets, ensuring ecosystem completeness in this context. And recently, Malaysia has also come up with energy transition plans, whereby they are moving into certain technologies and so forth. So that gives us some form of a direction where the sector should move forward. Yeah. And I think it's very important for us to have this coordination between investment, trade, human capital, and R&D policies within the context of the country. So while trade policy is easier to manipulate, it means it's easier to structure, easier to implement, but other policies requires more effort. Right? It's quite difficult because, like human capital policy, it takes years for you to make changes, right? Trade policy, if you want to change the tariff rate, say so, you can do it immediately. So the evolution of these policies are also different. The life cycle of it is also different. So it's much difficult to do human capital and other things. Yeah? I think Taiwan was fortunate because they had returnees from the US to build the ICT industry moving forward. Yeah? So the diaspora has helped them a lot. But in the case of Malaysia, we don't have those kind of advantage in that sense. Yeah. So either you build or you bring. I mean, if you're bringing from somewhere, then it will be very expensive as well. Okay. Okay. So okay. I think I'm running out of time. So I'm putting this in the context of how do we build the role of institutions to move forward. Yeah. So as I told you, the business balance of system and system integration, so the role of institution are important. So there's a lot of incentive to build the particular ecosystem, FIT policy, for instance, and so forth. But it is still relatively limited in that sense. So it does not prorogate higher number of players within the context of the value chain. Yeah. And there is also a kind of power struggle shaping institutional environment within the downstream activities because of the monopolization of the state-owned energy company. So there's a lot of renewed interest in terms of how do we reshape this. So that provides kind of limitations in terms of even improving the value chain of the downstream industries. Yeah. Right, so a bit of perspective about why MNCs are relocating. I think for Malaysia, it has been because of a technological relatedness. So we had a very strong E&E sector, so in that sense. And looking at the GVC configuration, I think we need to also understand how those firms are being configured in the process of knowing where the supply comes from, right? So when we also have mapped out that in perspective, so I think the import content is quite high as well, and there are some areas that we have looked into to see what are the products that are being imported and what are the products are being sourced locally. Yeah. Being a small open economy, local content requirements, you can't impose that too much because it will deter investment, foreign direct investment in that sense. Yeah. So this gives you a kind of indication about where the imports and exports are coming. Yeah. So are they sourcing from local producers and so forth. Yeah. So with that, I think the next chart is just an extension of where the sourcing are coming from. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that there's a lot of different paths that companies, or the government have taken in building industrial process. And I think it's important for us to take a GVC or value chain perspective in terms of looking into how it is structured, how do we respond to shocks, so that we can be better prepared in that sense. Yeah. And I think firms are also taking multiple strategies to upgrade and relocate strategically, and also the decision depends on the institution setting of the country, and it has an implication for the host country as well. And we don't see much differences between Chinese MNCs and others, given that they are completely for export market. Nevertheless, I think trade tension will affect Malaysia's export in solar PV industry if market diversification is not possible. Yeah? So I think I will end here.
Thank you, Professor Chen, for your very clear, interesting introduction and insight of policy analysis and also the trade and also export of the PV export in Malaysia, because Malaysia is the number 3 in the world for exportation about the PV system. I think you give us a very clear insight. Thank you. Now, next one, I'll go to Professor Llewellyn Hughes from Australia National University. Professor Hughes currently is a professor of public policy at the Crawford School of the Public Policy, Australian National University. He is expert in low carbon energy transition with a focus on sectorial approach to create a competitive advantage while addressing climate change. And his key interest is offshore wind power prospect in the Asia-Pacific region. He now serves also the Energy Transition Subcommittee of the Australian-Japan Business Cooperation Committee. And his topic right now, today, is Australia, building the green industry policy. Please.
Thanks so much. And I think the first thing I'd like to say is what fantastic data in that first presentation. You know, having done a little bit of this work myself, I have a strong appreciation about how many meetings and how many pavements you have to walk down in order to pull that information together, because it's not available to download off the web. That's for sure. So I very much appreciated the first thing I should say in general, that I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here today. I know this is the last panel, and I'll try and keep it engaging for you all. And to thank the Taipei School of Economic and Political Science Foundation, as well as the Kennedy School for putting this on and having me here. Much appreciated. I really also appreciated the previous panel. I was listening at the end with Professor Kwao's comment about, is geopolitics a residual category? So this is a picture at the bottom here of a mine in a place called Mount Weld. So Mount Weld is about 1,000 kilometers east of Perth. And if you know where Perth is, it's right over on the far side of Australia, about 4 hours flight, 3.5 hours flight from Sydney and Melbourne and the eastern seaboard. There's not a lot there apart from lizards and this mine. So I had the opportunity to visit this mine in 2014 doing a project on rare earth elements. This is a rare earth element mine. And one of the interesting things about it is how small it is. If you thought about walking its length, you could do it in about 15 minutes or something like that. If you look at the mine, I don't know if you can see in that picture, but closely enough, you'll also see that there's grass growing inside it. And when it rains, it doesn't rain there a lot, as you can see, but when it does rain, water collects in the bottom. And what that means is, indicates to you is, unlike you think of highly automated iron ore operations, right? Extremely large scale, extremely capital intensive, operating on 24/7, throughout the year, that the Mount Weld rare earth element mine, they run campaigns. So they will take a layer of dirt out and take it away and separate it. Actually, Malaysia plays an important role for the company Lynas, which is the owner of the mine, and then use it for the production of various things. Permanent magnets is an important use of neodymium, which is a key rare earth element that's used in the magnets for wind turbines, for example, to enable these big giant offshore wind turbines we see being built around the world. And my kind of point is, we read a lot about rare earth elements. We heard a lot about rare earth elements a moment ago. It's actually pretty small, So when you read about it in the newspapers, you think of this giant, big geopolitical issue. But when you look at the physical nature of the mine on the ground, it's quite a small, almost insignificant thing compared to a lot of the mining operations that go on around the world. Having said that, I cannot say that geopolitics is, and so if size is a proxy for importance, right, then this is small and therefore relatively unimportant, one might think. On the other hand, I can't say that geopolitics is uninvolved in this mine and rare earth elements and so on and so forth. In fact, a major investment in this mine is owned by a company called Lynas, but a major investor in this mine is an organization called JOGMEC. And JOGMEC is one of Japan's policy banks, which invests in upstream exploration and early stage production across a variety of different minerals, but it has a very important national security role, right? It's about securing supply chains, diversifying supply chains upstream. So in 2011, when rare earth prices spiked because of the embargo that we heard about a moment ago, and then collapsed, afterwards, Japanese public money kept this mine afloat because of geopolitics, energy security, diversification, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's hard to say that geopolitics is uninvolved, but I guess I'm kind of giving an extended introduction here to say that you do have to be very careful about understanding scale and significance when you're thinking about geopolitics. I was asked to say a couple of things about Australia's policies in response to US-China tension as it pertains to the energy sector. And I think the first thing that's important to do when thinking about how those things are related to each other is to understand what's going on within the energy mix within Australia. How is Australia's energy system changing? And you can think broadly about Australia's energy system as being made up of two components. One is the domestic economy and what fuels and what technologies are being used to supply the domestic economy with energy services, right? And the other, of course, is the very important role that Australia plays as an exporter of particularly emissions-intensive bulk energy-related commodities to the Asia-Pacific region, which is something that's happened for decades. And so I think the first thing to do, it's worthwhile just understanding what's going on in those two areas, the domestic context, the international context, because that gives you an idea about what's changing and what the geopolitical implications of those changes might be, right? So Australia has a competitive electricity market called the National Electricity Market. Actually, Western Australia and the NEM, as it's called, are not connected, so there's no power lines between them. But the NEM makes up about 80% of total electricity which is used within Australia. Of course, there are liquid fuels in the transport sector and so on and so forth. And what this shows you is that on the 1st of October from 2024, that peak renewable electricity generation within the national electricity market, it's not a voluntary pool, it's a compulsory pool, so all electricity goes in there to be traded and so on, hit just a little bit under 74% of total electricity over a 30-minute increment, okay? So it's not like that all the time, but if you look at the data over time, there is an extraordinarily rapid shift away from the use of fossil fuels within the domestic electricity sector within Australia, despite our Prime Minister holding a lump of coal up in Parliament and those kinds of things. What you are seeing in the domestic economy, certainly within the electricity sector, is very rapid, deep decarbonisation through the deployment of solar primarily, particularly rooftop solar. So this is behind the meter on people's houses. As well as onshore wind, and we might see a little bit of offshore wind in the future. And also, of course, storage matters a lot. So we are seeing a lot of investment in grid-side battery storage, as well as pumped hydro for longer-term storage. We're thinking... I think most modeling suggests there will be continued gas peakers in the system. So gas will continue to play some kind of residual role. What this means is that if you look at Australia's emissions, for example, that CO2 emissions associated with the electricity sector have been falling year on year for quite some time, really from 2016 by about 3.6% year on year. And the expectation is that will continue to fall. Okay? Now, agriculture matters for us, transport matters for us, manufacturing, chemicals, and so on matters, but much less, right? We're not a big manufacturing powerhouse. And those are going much slower. Electrification is the key pathway for decarbonising the transport sector, but it's speeding up. So now I think it's somewhere in the region of 7 or 8% of new vehicle sales are electric vehicles, and I would expect that to speed up over time. My next car will be, and it'll be probably a build your dreams when I do end up buying it. So that's the kind of domestic picture, right? The government has a target in place of 82% renewables by 2030. We may not get there, but we'll be close, right? And I'll talk about what that means in a minute for the kind of bigger geopolitics question, right? So the other dimension with this, of course, is the international dimension. That is, for decades and decades, Australia's trade with the Asia-Pacific has been dominated by exports, or at least our exports have been dominated by emissions-intensive bulk commodities of energy. That means thermal coal, which you can see here. That means natural gas from the 80s onwards, and also you have metallurgical coal used in steel manufacturing as well. Not much oil, okay? And so a big question is, what is going to happen to that trade over time? Now, what you can see in front of you is data which current and projected data for 2023, 24, 25, 26 of thermal coal exports to major fossil fuel importers across the Asia-Pacific region. And you can see that Asia as a whole at the bottom there, that those numbers are falling. So when we say energy transition, it indeed is a transition, and it's going to take decades. But the general direction of travel is fairly clear, and that is that the physical volumes of these commodities that we have been selling to the region is going to fall over time, okay? We've done some modeling work, some integrated assessment modeling to look at how quickly that might happen, and it depends on a lot of things that are uncertain right now. Which technologies Japan, South Korea, China, others are going to use to decarbonize? Will carbon capture and sequestration be a big thing or not? Okay, if not, then fossil fuels have to exit the system more quickly, right? So there's a lot of uncertainties there, but I think that the general direction of travel is really clear for Australia. A reduction in seaborne trade of emissions-intensive bulk commodities to the region. It'll take time, but that's the direction of travel. In fact, I think I'd probably put that up there. There we go, direction of travel. Yes. Second, an increase in trade in manufactured products and components for solar modules, for wind turbines, for battery storage systems, and for other low-carbon technologies, right? So we're going to be either making or importing a lot more energy-related manufactured products, even as we reduce the amount of exports of commodities, okay? That's a pretty big and significant change, over time, to the structure of the way that Australia trades with the world. And then the third thing, and this is what I'd like to focus on just briefly, is what the opportunities are for Australia for exporting within the low-carbon energy transition, okay? Because this is the area where the Australian federal government and the state governments, we have a federal system, are becoming much, much more active, okay? We heard about green industry policies, so the Australian government, I would say, is currently trying to relearn how to do industry policy and how to tailor it to a world of global value chains and other complexities that didn't exist in the 80s to the same degree. So one of the big opportunities that we are considering and that we have policy settings in place, I'll talk about in a moment ago, are in what's called critical minerals. I don't really like this phrase because, as we've heard about, each one of these products or each one of these minerals has a very different market structure associated with it. Rare earth elements, small volumes, right? Copper, it's not on that picture, but copper, extremely large volumes, it's very, very important for transmission lines globally as part of the transition. So they do look pretty different, who produces them, how much you produce, what the value is, and so on. But nevertheless, broadly across a wide range of different minerals, many are becoming increasingly important to the energy transition. This shows technologies on the y-axis and on the associated with the energy transition. The x-axis is minerals and their utility in those technologies, right? That's just from IEA data. And this is Australia's global share for selected minerals within that. There are more, but you'll see that for a number of minerals which are understood to be important, that we have a pretty big market share of potentially, I should say, of them. What that's meant is that the government has become much more active, like if you look at those various changes going on, much more active in kind of developing a series of policy frameworks around critical minerals. So this is a list for you of the kind of, it's really just trying to show you activism on behalf of government, right? A series of strategies released at the federal government level, trying to understand how Australia might encourage the critical minerals industry to grow, most recently with the revised critical minerals strategy. One of the things that the government does, so I should say, if I was to broadly characterize the way that Australia approaches particularly the critical minerals sector, it plays a role in market facilitation. Okay, so it's very much kind of a market-conforming approach to enabling inward foreign direct investment in the minerals sector, right? What that means, for example, is we spend some tens of millions of dollars a year developing maps like this, right? This is pre-competitive data, so it's not specific enough that companies don't want to share it with one another, but the government reduces the capital costs associated with exploration from companies by going out and identifying where potential mineral deposits might lie around the world, right? So it's consistent with lowering the costs associated with investing in this sector for companies, but not in a way that's picking winners, right? Rather on a kind of pre-competitive, as it's kind of called. We also do quite a lot of different things in research and development. For example, helping defray the costs of getting more efficient with resource extraction, measuring feed quality within processing facilities, that kind of stuff. You can see that up in the top corner. Am I going to push the right button? Yeah, up here, right? All this sort of stuff. This is all fundamental research, which is typically research industry-led, so combined big joint research groups, which are pre-competitive. They're about R&D. They're about lowering the costs, capital costs for individual firms that might be choosing to invest in this particular sector. The last thing that maybe I'll say is maybe two quick things. Compared to what I've just described as a kind of market-friendly approach to government intervention, green industry policies in Australia to support these new industry, development of these new industries, we are now seeing a more step change, if you like. So currently before our Parliament there is a piece of legislation called the Future Made in Australia Act. And it says that if particular industries are identified as meeting the criteria that you see up here on the screen, then the government will consider using a variety of funding vehicles to support the development of those industries within Australia. And again, we come back to geopolitics. You will see one of the big categories has got to do with economic security. Okay, the other one is really about competitive advantage, right? But economic security is in there. In fact, in the submissions, we talked about the political economy of the issue before, in the submissions around this act, the National Caravan Association of Australia submitted and said that for national security grounds, we should be manufacturing caravans within Australia. I don't know if I bought that one, but nevertheless, what it signals to you, I think, and to me, is that the government is thinking or is actively thinking about trying to move down the value chain and not only think about mining, processing, but also manufacturing within Australia, batteries, some vehicles, wind turbines we're looking at the moment, solar as well. So there's kind of a change which is going on from this market facilitation to a more activist green industry policy, and we're going to see how that develops over time. The last point I would just make is about Australia's particularly energy-related research and development funding. So I think it was mentioned in the previous presentation, if you're thinking about an innovation policy, it's always good to invest in areas which are adjacent to areas that you're already good at, right? So, if Australia is good at digging things out of the ground, not so good at building nuclear power plants, right? So we probably shouldn't try and move into that kind of sector. Right? One of the problems I think that the government's going to have to wrestle with over time is that the Australian economy is very undiversified. We've been very reliant on commodity exports for a very long time, small manufacturing sector, Obviously, services dominate, like all OECD countries. But our investment in R&D is very low as a share of GDP compared to other OECD countries. And I think that one of the issues we're going to need to deal with is diversifying the economy through early stage of R&D so that we've got more related industries that we can potentially move into going forward. That's just a personal view. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, well, Professor Hughes. Very impressive presentation about the two strategies, the critical mineral strategy and also the future made in Australia. Very impressed. Thank you. Now, we'll next go to the third panelist. Now, I'd like to introduce you the Daiji Xiao is currently a joint research fellow at the Institute of Economics, Academia Sinica, professor at the National Zhengzhi University, a member of the National Committee of the Future Earth, Academia Sinica. He used to be the former president of the East Asia Association of Environmental and Resource Economic and the Taiwan Association of the Environmental and Resource Economics. And his key contributors to the co-authors of the highly cited Ricardian analysis on global warming impact on agriculture. It being well recognized by the 2019 AERE publication of Enduring Quality Awards and the 2023 AAERE Fellow. And his topic today now is the East Asia Climate Club, opportunity for migrating risk of the climate change and the geopolitical tension. Professor Xiao, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your introduction. Yeah, this is I am going to, at first I'd like to thank the school of the Taipei School to invite me to join this conference. And I'm an economist, an environmental economist, and so it's many talks and many presentations today for me. That's very new for me. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about economics and then try to bring some bridge the economics and the politics. This is the contents, and at first I'd like to. Everyone here knows that there's an urgent need for action to mitigate climate change, and then I will talk about two stories. One is a successful story, and the other one is a failure story of existing international environmental institutions, and then try to draw some lessons from those stories. And then for using this, then we like to know how to deal with the very important and very critical problem or risk, that's climate change. And then I'd like to present or to propose a new institution to deal with this critical risk. And then after that, I'd like to discuss if there's any opportunity for mitigating risks of geopolitical tensions in this region or in the world using the lessons from what we have learned from the climate change mitigation problem. Okay, I believe everybody knows that we need to do a very urgent, urgent actions to deal with the climate change risks. Okay, first, from this series of study, this series of study of planetary boundaries. This is the latest one, latest publication. It says that the Earth is beyond 6 of 9 planetary boundaries. 9 planetary boundaries. This is the 9 planetary boundaries. And the red one are highly risky planetary boundaries. And climate change is one of them, but it's not the highest one. The highest one is from biodiversity, and the other one is biogeochemical flows. That's nitrogen and phosphorus. That's in a very dangerous or a very risky situation. The other one is novel entities such as plastics and many new chemicals. Okay, and so in general, we know that climate change becomes an irreversible climate crisis. So now it's a crisis, not only a change, but a crisis. Why is crisis? Because it's irreversible. Irreversible. And why is irreversible? Because the tipping points of climate change may be overshoot soon. Overshoot. So what's the tipping point? Tipping point is this one. Global warming of 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial levels. If we pass these tipping points, then the temperature or the global warming will become an irreversible. Irreversible means the temperature will grow and grow and grow up to maybe 8 degrees C or 9 degrees C. Then in that kind of environment, human civilization will be in danger. So the tipping points, it says that if the tipping point is overshot, then there will be a high probability of running into risk across various aspects of human life, including ecological system, human health, living costs, political and financial and political stability, and finally, human civilization. That's because if the tipping point has been passed, and then the temperature, global average temperature will increase and increase and increase up to, say, 9 or 8 or 9 degrees C. And at that time, no civilization, human civilization, then the problem will be solved. Okay, so what is required to not overshoot the tipping points and to save the risk? The scientists tell us that's a path of a trajectory, of an emission trajectory. That's the net emissions of greenhouse gases or net emission of CO2 must be 0 by 2050, and then net emission must be negative, that means more than 0 after 2050. Okay, why is that? Because here I'd like to introduce to you 2 very important new concepts. That's a remaining carbon budget and a carbon date. Remaining carbon budget is the estimated cumulative net global anthropogenic CO2 emissions from a given starting date to the time that CO2 emissions reach net zero that would result in limiting global warming to a given level, accounting for the Okay, that's the remaining carbon budget is around 400 to 400 gigaton of CO2 for 50% probability of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees or 500 for 66% probability. So this amount of the remaining carbon budget will be exhausted within 10 years, within 10 years. Okay, within 10 years. So the emissions after the remaining carbon budget is depleted, then becomes carbon debt. What's a carbon debt? That's a carbon debt means that's the past and the present generation owe this carbon debt to our future generations. So the carbon debt generated therefore must be repaid. We must pay back the carbon debt using a costly carbon dioxide removal technologies. So to be responsible ancestors, this generation, must leave a financial asset to our future generations that is enough to pay back the carbon debt. Means it's unavoidable to leave a carbon debt to our future generation, but at the same time, we must also leave a financial asset for them to pay back this carbon debt. So, what we need to do first, we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible, and then carbon debt will need to be paid back by costly CDR technologies using, and that's that kind of a negative emission technologies. And then we also need to leave a financial asset enough for our future generations to purchase or to invest in CDR technology to pay back the carbon debt. That's the conclusion of the. Okay, then how to do it? Then that's three jobs need to be done. First, we need to have new institutions, and then of course we need to have policy instruments, including economic incentive and command and control instruments, policy instruments to deal with to make people and all emitters to reduce emissions and also to remove emissions. And then the last one is R&D. But here in this talk, I will focus on new institution and leave these two aside. So new institutions. So here I'd like to review two international environmental agreements. The first one is a successful one. That's a Montreal Protocol of 1987. Montreal Protocol aims to phase out the production of CFC that will cause, those are responsible for ozone depletion. The reasons behind its landmark achievement, according to many studies, okay, there are three reasons. The first one is that the industry, it involves a very narrow set of industry. That's mainly that's a chemical industry. It's very narrow. And then there's a penalty mechanisms in the Montreal Protocol. It is enforcement mechanism that impose penalties such as trade restrictions and the threats to ban products containing CFCs. Even though Taiwan is not Taiwan cannot sign the Montreal Protocol, but Taiwan still face this penalty. So our government has done a good job to limiting the emission from CFCs. Okay, the other one is technology innovation. Some argue that the alternatives to CFC existed at that time. Okay, but some say that that's because of the penalty mechanism incentivize firms to invest in developing alternatives to CFCs. So those are the three reasons behind. But the international agreements, international environmental agreements, or for climate change, including UNFCCC, that's the United Nations Framework for Convention on Climate Change. That's a framework convention. And then the two agreements following this in this framework convention is the Kyoto Protocol and of 1997 and the Paris Agreement of 2015. That's a failure. That's a totally failure. A lot of studies and books to study this problem. Why the reasons behind their failure? One is that target sectors, all sectors are involved as greenhouse gas emitters, all sectors, and everyone, and all sectors are involved as greenhouse gas emitters. And also, all are affected by climate change, all. So it's so making its governance more complex and challenging, because everyone and every person and every industry has different benefits and costs. So different interests have different interests. And then the penalty mechanism. There's no penalty mechanism in this framework convention and these two agreements. No, purely voluntary international agreements without enforcement mechanism and penalties. And the other one is technology innovation. Because there's no penalty, and so no penalty to incentivize firms to develop technology. So now this technology development is very slow, very slow. Okay, so why this climate change international environmental agreement for climate change is a failure? Here I like to just present some, I'd like to present some fundamental causes. First, from economics, that's a very clearly, that's a market failure. Yeah, it's a very good example of market failure. Externalities, public goods, and common property resources. And then the collective outcome of these three market failures is prisoner dilemma. That means most people and countries and most firms would rather be free riders, have an incentive to defect and behave non-cooperatively. In the end, all enjoy the worst outcome collectively. That's the loss of human civilization in the future, maybe in 21st century. Okay, the other one, that's the firm institution and the governance. That's, of course, there are very vested, a lot of vested interests, but very differently. So, and the other one, one important one is this one, agency problem. The agent for future generation does not exist. Does not exist in the present decision-making process. And another one is from psychology. The psychologists say that those are the human perception biases. But the one here, that's optimism, because people usually will think that the bad luck will not happen to me. So every country says that the bad luck of climate change will not happen to me. Will not happen to me. So the tendency to believe that they are more immune from others to climate change misfortunes. So that we can wait and see. Here, I like to raise our attention to the studies of Aline Ostrom, who owns the Nobel Prize of Economics in 2009. And actually, he is a professor of political science. Yeah. But he won the Nobel Prize of Economics. Okay. She was awarded for her analysis of economic governance, especially the commons. And then he proposed, he summarized 8 design principles for that were present in the sustainable common pool resource institutions she studied, where there is no tragedy of the commons. And so after she won she was awarded the Nobel Prize, IPCC asked her to provide advice to IPCC how to deal with this very difficult problem of climate change mitigation. And she said, okay, first, we know that UNFCCC is a form of top-down and a monocentric governance. It means it's controlled by a single unitary power. That's a UN system. And also cautioned against the single governmental units at a global level to solve the collective action problem of coordinating work against environmental destruction. She prefers a polycentric approach to coping with climate change. This is the sentence in her paper of 2009 at the request of IPCC. Okay. I cannot control. Next page, please. Okay. Okay. So she prefers a polycentric approach. What is a polycentric approach? Okay, she said, efforts to reduce global greenhouse gases are a classical collective action problem best addressed at multiple scales and levels. A polycentric approach has the main advantage of encouraging experimental efforts at multiple levels. And here, I'd like to give some examples of polycentric approach for climate change. The first one, international, that's a climate club. That's a climate clubs. And for firms or for industry, there are many alliances in different countries or by different industries. Here, let's focus on climate club. Okay, what is a climate club? A climate club such as EU is a climate club. EU is a club, and it is a political club first, and an economic club, and then also a climate club. A climate club has a common climate change mitigation policy, including carbon pricing at a common price, such as EU ETS, EU emission trading system. And then it also needs a penalty for non-members, such as carbon border adjustment mechanism. EU is going to, it's already the law, the regulation for EU CBAM has been passed last year. And then this is the EU will collect carbon border tax based on the carbon contents of imports into EU. Okay, and then the other one is penalty tariff. And Professor Norhaus, he has done a study. He says that he prefers penalty tariff because he thinks that the CBM, the transaction cost of CBAM is complicated and ineffective. Because the high transaction cost of CBM will make CBAM complicated and ineffective. But penalty tariff may violate a critical principle of WTO, that's a non-discrimination, principle of non-discrimination against imports. Okay, actually, the idea of climate crop were raised by two environmental political scientists. That's Barrett and Victor in around year 2000. Okay, and then since Norhaus presented a paper of climate crop study in 2015 in his presidential address to the American Economic Association, and summarized in his Nobel Prize lecture in the same year, the research on the effectiveness of climate crop has been booming, including two of our papers. And the EU is a good example of a climate crop. And recently, in EU CBAM regulation of last year, this is the paragraph in this regulation. It says that the establishment of CBAM calls for the development of bilateral, multilateral, and international cooperation with third countries. For that purpose, a forum of countries with carbon pricing instruments and other comparable instruments, that's a climate crop, should be set up in order to promote the implementation of ambitious environmental climate policies in all countries. So the EU right now is promoting climate crop. That means EU welcome other countries to join EU ETS. In our paper, we propose 4 ambitious common policy instruments program for East Asia climate crop, including Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and China. And we find out that the four policies are including uniform carbon price, CBAM, and a commitment to fully phase out fossil fuel power generation without CCS by 2050, and a green crop fund for payoff the carbon debt. The result of the study shows that all club members would benefit both environmentally and economically, and it is an excellent program to facilitate international cooperation on climate change. Okay, that's the conclusion. After studying the failure and the success story of international climate change agreements, what can we learn? And is there opportunity for mitigating risk of geopolitical tensions in this region? Okay, we think that the climate change can cause tensions and conflict both between and within countries. Everybody knows that. And so it is likely that the climate change risk will hold some parts of the world together with climate club. Okay, because I have heard some professor here say that economics will hold the world together this morning. Okay, and here I think the risk from climate change may hold some countries together, not everyone, but some, just like the EU. And then if the climate club using some sticks and carrots together, they may hold more and more countries together to join the climate club. So the establishment of a climate club can hold not only environmental and economic benefits, but also enhance international cooperation. And actually, we know that the success of Montreal Protocol and the EU is like a repeated cooperation game. Repeated. And each round of relatively modest and yet binding agreements spurs further innovation and improves prospect for continued cooperation. So initial international cooperation may foster trust and mutual support among participating countries needed for producing global public goods, including mitigating climate change and mitigating risks of geopolitical tensions and foster world peace. That's my conclusion. And so I think for Taiwan, the policy implication, and maybe I know it's very difficult to organize or to form or to set up a East Asia Climate Club. Okay, but we can join EU ETS or join another emission trading market that's of California and Quebec and Ontario. They have a joint emission trading market. Maybe we can discuss with them to join. Then that's another way. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Shaw, for your excellent presentation and give us a great idea how to deal with internationally alliance on mitigating the climate change risk. Now we are going to the discussion. We welcome the discussion of Professor Chen Tianzi. He is quite famous in this country. Used to be the Minister for National Development Council and also the President of the Taipei Economic School of Economics. Is a famous professor in economics and also the professor in National Taiwan University. Now, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Really happy to have the opportunity to read the 3 excellent papers and making comments. The 3 papers looks like going in very different directions. But I think actually they are related. So I will say what I have learned, make that comments, and then I have a few questions to ask. Now the first one, I think all these 3 papers were shown, particularly the paper by Professor Hughes, that electricity or the power generation, the change of the structure of these sort of electricity sources seems to be the most important issue today if we want to reach carbon neutrality by any time frame. because as you mentioned in the paper, electricity will usually contribute more than 30% of the carbon emission in any country. And plus, if you consider the second most important sector contributing to carbon emission, meaning transportation, we are trying to use electric cars to replace the fuel-driven cars. So in that sense, that you also need to change the structure of the electricity power generation in order to achieve that. So Taiwan is already facing a big struggle now because of the although this Paris Convention, Paris Agreement is voluntary, but the international supply chains, particularly the supply chains that with the big flagship company, making the orders as what kind of production process they should go through. So the company here are really already receiving big pressure from the flagship company to to reach the goal of carbon neutrality. They should have a schedule doing that. Every big suppliers, including company like TSMC. So therefore, everybody is competing for the very scarce supply of green power. So the immediate question is, if we do not have cross-border, some kind of international collaboration, as Daichi was showing to show, if we do not have any inter-country collaboration, I think, at least for Taiwan, it's almost impossible to reach that sort of carbon neutrality goal. So I think it's natural to think about how then we can collaborate in terms of the electricity supply. As an island, it's probably very, very difficult to do so. If we can do this with China, it'll be fine, but the geopolitical situation will make this almost impossible. But I guess that countries like, the ASEAN countries, they are kind of border each other, and it may be possible to have some sort of exchange and trade in terms of power supply. And I guess that's very important if you think about really achieving this goal seriously at the global level. The second lesson I learned, of course, is supply chain collaboration, which is reflected in Professor Chandler's paper a lot. The supply chain coming from the silicon, polysilicon, all the way down to solar modules and installation of the system. Apparently the supply chain collaboration, again, across the border is very important, because you don't expect everyone can really have the ability to kind of make everything green. Some countries may be better than the other countries in making a particular production process green than the other countries. So therefore, this trade will, when we talk about the carbon neutrality thing or green transformation, trade will actually become more and more important. And trade, and considering how this supply chain can get connected. And so I think regional cooperation seems to me will becoming more and more important, right? Because if you ship the goods really in long distance by itself, it's not green, right? So therefore, this is the second thing I think we should consider that. So for that, I think to come to the third paper, I would believe that the suggestion of kind of unifying common pricing in all countries. It's a very important initiative. How can we make this common pricing homogeneous across the nations? Of course, the biggest challenge now is how to encourage every country to have a pricing system, right? That's the first very big challenge for we to get into that. But once we get that, every country. And maybe before we do that, we should think about the ways of eventually get this pricing system integrated in a way that you have, homogeneous pricing. The law of one price, right? The law of one price will apply when you have really a free market. So even if we cannot do this, so in that sense, I think CBAM is not really a very good solution. And when this was really commence operation, it became the first institution to be established. There's a danger. There's danger that we will not get a really good optimal solution in the end. Because if you want people to follow the European system, but eventually you probably get a kind of, the trade. I think get to the question I think mentioned in some paper is it's important though the energy policy. And you're thinking about trying to deal with this by trade policy. You're probably going to get a suboptimal solution. So that's kind of worry. All right, so I have two questions, actually, two or three. One, of course, is how important is geopolitics, as Danny has referred to. And apparently, I think when you talk about energy, this is very essential national security item issues. So naturally, I think geopolitics is going to get into it. And it's been getting into it. But look at the solar industry and the rare earth mining in Australia and how the Japanese government been active in exploring the possibility of alternative supply in Australia in be able to chipping in public money over doing that, right? So how do we if you think of the Malaysia being able to benefit from this, really some kind of geopolitical tension? And actually, I think my question is that really geopolitical? When U.S. and EU launched the anti-subsidy and anti-dumping charges against China's solar panel import in 2012 or 2013, the geopolitics was not that important yet, right? It's more pure kind of trade friction, I think. All right, and so that's one. And second, of course, how do we get this solar panel and application down to earth, particularly the domestic application and the regional application, right? You don't want to make all these kind of things and ship to the United States just because U.S. now is imposing 100% tariff on the Chinese import of the solar panels. How to get that really adopted in the region, at least in the ASEAN countries, will be something that will be interesting to know. For Daiichi, I think it's a great idea, but how to get us started? If not Taiwan, maybe some other countries in Asia. So where's the incentive? Where's the incentive? Whether the alternative to your proposal, something like we have maybe a carbon trade market, a carbon trade mechanism, which can be invested and operated and used by different countries. Would that be easier to do than the one you are very ambitious plan? That's all my question and comments. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Now let's start from Professor Hughes. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. Our next discussion is Professor Lin. Professor Lin used to be the government spokesman. Used to be the minister in Executive Yuan, and he is quite famous doing work for the carbon reduction and energy saving project in Taiwan. Right now, he also holds as a deputy CEO for carbon reduction and energy saving project in government. Please.
Thank you, Chair, and all the three paper authors for excellent presentation. I think I'll just make a quick comment and some questions just followed by the Professor Chen. I think in the first impression, the three paper goes to three different directions, but it comes together is very interesting because the first paper go very detailed to the solar panel industry within one country, from Malaysia. And the second, Australia, I'm quite envious because you have abundant resources domestically and fossil fuel and also renewable energy. And the third paper is go to more broadly and also in the regional perspective about the East Asia Climate Club. So come together is quite interesting to address today's panel on energy transition and geopolitics. But I just a few questions because the first, I think first I would like to echo the first action from the Li Wenlin is the first, also the Malaysia paper, because looks like there's a renew and the return the interest of green industrial policy. Because you can look at the recent phenomena, IMF, the published the report, and also the U.S. recently enacted the inflation, the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, which was trying to promote green industry, for example, EV, electric vehicle, clean energy industrial transition, and battery and the power grid in the U.S. And EU, on the other hand, also doing the same thing. You are looking, EU recently passed the law, the Net Zero Industrial Act. So trying to increase their industrial competitiveness and among with the US. So you'll see the US, the EU, and also many countries in the world, they are also trying to bring the green industrial policy back. So it's very interesting. So today's paper trying to echo this trend. But based on I think the detailed analysis, especially for these two papers, I have a question for the first two authors of the paper. So what's the role of the China factor play in your analysis? Because I think also echo the main thing of today's forum. Because the reason is that China now is the world's largest share of renewable energy installment in the world in the past few years. And also in particular in recent years, China's overcapacity of the solar panel has already raised international concern. So how Malaysia, for example, addressing the solar panel over reduction issues from China, and also in Australia, how to address this kind of a challenge, especially China's role and your major importer of your fossil fuel and the renewable energy materials. And the second, regarding Professor Xiao's interesting idea to propose the East Asia Climate Club, because I actually look at that issue for some time, because this Asia Climate Club is not a new thing, but it's not for East Asia Climate Club specifically, but because it's kind of has been discussing because. For UNFCCC, basically it's a consensus-based decision-making process. There's a subgroup actually during the annual negotiation. For Climate Club, it's a common phenomena. But if you put together, because there's one proposal beforehand, is actually because the 20 most emitter in the world actually accounted for 80% of the greenhouse emission, the 2080s. So there's been the argument saying that we don't need to invite 200 states to sit there. We just invite the 20 major emitters, then they will solve the 80% problems. There has been an argument saying that otherwise usually it's no efficient. But it's not a very democratic process because actually, this probably the 50 country, the last emitted country, accounted only 1% of global emitters. But actually, they're probably the most affected country or regions. So this is not just accounted by the emission alone. They actually is a democratic process. Also, the stakeholder engagement. So usually there's a conflict during the UNFCCC negotiation that the climate developing country and industrial country are pointing finger and who need to share the responsibility, share the financial cost, and who should provide technology transfer, and so on. So the climate club, I think, is a good idea, but also need to address, I think, the internal structure division of the developing country or north-south division of the countries. Otherwise, it's a good approach to look at. But if we focus this in East Asia, it's also a little more complicated. So this is my question to Professor Xiao. So how do you put this, especially China, China is the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world, accounting for probably 30%. And you put these 4 partners in this region in the world, then it's probably how to put it in the table, in the same level, and to address the question. That will be interesting. And finally, I think the general question to the author of the papers, I think it'd be interesting to explore. I think there are lots of papers trying to think about whether the emerging trend of the decarbonization of industry or the renewable energy transition would bring the world more secure, or more peace, or more democracy. The renewable, or other than there's a fossil fuel. Will the transition lead to more, or the transition lead to more conflict, or peace? So we will think about if the China, for example, the renewable energy leaders like China, Denmark, Germany, will they strengthen their position in the global affairs? And also, is likely a backlash from, for example, the petrostate OECD country during the transition phases. So they will be very interesting. I think the renewable energy transition bring the war, peace, or the global conflict. So finally, I think the point is, I think the clean energy transformation is now clear, because the end point is clear, because we are arguing for 2050 net zero emission. But the process itself, I think, is complex for each region, each sector. So I think today's paper bring a very interesting idea, so we can think about how their implication to geopolitical consequence. But we need to more explore and more discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Professor Hughes, will you please first one?
Thanks for the excellent comments. I sort of feel like it would have been terrific to be a discussant on both of your remarks, to hear your own views, personal views as well. So a few unformed thoughts. Firstly, around supply chain collaboration. So, if you look, there's been some terrific studies on the development of the solar industry globally, solar being the most developed mature, I guess, of renewable energy technologies. And it's very clear that although collaboration or coordination, let's say, happened through disaggregated markets rather than through governmental agreement, that collaboration was absolutely central to driving down the costs of solar globally and enabling it to scale. And that involves Germany. That still involves Germany today, with a lot of quality control equipment being used in China. It involves China, of course. It involves Japan, and it involves Australia too, because a lot of the Chinese PhDs, mainland Chinese PhDs, took their PhD from a guy in New South Wales and then went and built these amazing companies. So it's been a very disaggregated, not centralized, but nevertheless very collaborative process. And on that, I think one of the things that question one that comes, and it relates to the points that were made by both of you, is, so what is the role for government in and around green industry policy? And my kind of starting point here is that it's very, very different. So lots of technology are not yet competing on a non-subsidized basis, right? So EVs, you have consumer subsidies. Solar's getting better, but not in every market. Most markets still have feed-in tariff, CFD, some kind of financial incentive, which is essentially a transfer to the developer or to the generator from everybody's taxes, right? And I think that it's very, very difficult as a general principle for governments for us to expect that governments would not intervene to try and ensure that some value, jobs are created at home in return for the transfer of, income tax to, companies which are generating power. That leads you to think that you are going to see continued intervention by governments to try and create capabilities at home, right? Because the green transition can't be about, subsidizing someone else's companies somewhere else. So then for me, the really interesting question becomes, what are the guardrails we're going to put on that, right? So if we're not going to have a global carbon price, right, so we're going to end with a patchwork of different policy mechanisms. If we accept that there is a strong political economy argument for some kind of intervention to ensure value is captured at home in return for subsidizing, using income tax to subsidize the deployment of these technologies, then what are the guardrails that we should put around that reemergence of industry policy, right? Rather than saying, should we do it, say it's going to happen, so what are the rules? And first thing there is, the WTO still plays a role here. If you look at the measures which were introduced by the US, first under the Obama administration, actually, against Chinese module exporters, they were introduced under domestic trade legislation that allowed the US government to claim trade relief because of a large, rapid increase of imports, right? So in a way, it was done in a way that was consistent with existing international trade rules, right? Even though, people didn't like it. So maybe that's one guard rule, like the international trade rules that we have are quite kind of good. And we want to continue to ensure that, that measures are consistent with those. That gets to the second point, which I think is still a bit of a mess, is in industry policies, is what is our unit of analysis, Like, do we care? In the old days, industry policy was about national champions, So the French wanted a French company, the Germans wanted a German company, and so on, right? But as we hear from the story of Malaysia, you have new capabilities which have been built, which have been very beneficial within the country, which are substantially being provided by Chinese firms, or it could be firms from anywhere, really. But it's not only about building your own car, like the old, what's the Malaysian car called again? Yeah, the Proton, exactly. It's a different idea around industry policy, right? It's about creating value at home, regardless of the flag that the company itself has. So, that's an area where I think there's still some confusion about what's optimal. We use the term industry policy, we think about national champions, but maybe that's not the best way to go. And the last point that was raised was about China or geopolitics and China. I guess they come together in the same sentence when you're talking about this stuff. So a couple of points here, I guess. One, I do see, we talk about energy as being, because of the oil shocks really, and earlier, back to the 20s, energy as being this kind of highly politically charged or geopolitical problem. But one of the key differences of a decarbonized energy system and an energy system that relies on fossil fuels is that the fuel for wind turbines and for solar panel modules is the sun and the wind. It's not oil, it's not a hydrocarbon, which is limited in a few places around the world, right? The Middle East, where else you might talk about. So where the supply chain becomes important, it's about module manufacturing and so on, but, these are factories. They're not oil fields where nature gave some countries oil and some countries no oil. If you want to build a solar module manufacturer and subsidize it enough, you can do it, right? You can never build an oil field, but you can build a factory. So I think that the kind of geopolitical implications of energy transition broadly are positive in terms of reducing geopolitical tensions, right? Because you can always build your own if you don't have to, go to the place which has gas or which has oil or whatever it might be. So that's a hopeful note to finish on.
Okay, thank you. For further agenda, please.
Yeah, probably I'll try to answer the first question on the geopolitical factors that shapes the solar industry. So that answers both the comments that you have given. I think that is one factor that made China to shift some of their production lines, the relocation of it. But that is not entirely the story, I believe, because it is also about market-seeking nature of Chinese firms looking into Asia as the growing region. The growth is much higher here. ASEAN itself provides a lot of opportunity in terms of market. So I think there are multiple factors that comes into place in terms of the relocation decisions made. Of course, see, China has a lot of reserves, and they have to park that somewhere to generate return out of it. So it can't be really domestically invested. Of course, there are huge population to generate the return, but they also have to go out to ensure that there's efficiency in terms of returns of the investments. Yeah. So it's kind of both ways. Of course, there's a push factor in terms of geopolitics reasons, but also there is also pull factors in terms of market that you have in Asia. So basically, it's more of trying to diversify your market. Of course, that will also help you in terms of dealing with some of these trade tensions that you have with the US. Right, so I think there's multiple factors that need to be looked into, yeah. And the choice they made, why do they come to Malaysia, is basically the infrastructure is there in terms of human capital and many other things within the context of the country. So that helps them in terms of making a better decision. Why do they come there? Why not to Indonesia? Why not to Vietnam? But even then, there is some kind of differences in terms of quality of human capital and other things across ASEAN countries. So I think there's multiple factors that need to be taken into account in terms of when you think about firms' strategic decision in terms of why they move forward. The second question is about whether the adaptability of or regional application of these renewable technologies. Yeah. So I think if you want to improve the take-up rate for this kind of renewable technologies in Asia, I think many of the countries have subsidization of energy. So that really limits you from pushing through renewable energy technologies for adoption, right? So the government need to rethink about how do we move away from subsidization of energy in that sense, yeah. But that is a political sensitive question because that affects society at large, right? Removing subsidy is not an easy way. There's no easy solution. So Malaysia is trying to do that by coming up with tiering system, who benefits out of these subsidies and so on. But it is still in the negotiation table. They are not moving far. Even petrol subsidy and so forth. Yeah. So because energy is the highly polluting industry. And because the sustainability standards are coming so strong, so even they're integrating that with financial systems, and also financial statements of the companies. Issues, concepts like ESG is coming strong. So if that standards are coming strong, then energy sector is the first sector that need to be looked into, because for any company, scope 1 will be the energy, right? So energy emission that your company is producing. So if we don't tackle that, the energy sector or even the transportation sector, then we will be left out in terms of being competitive if those sustainability standards are coming strong. So the kind of dilemma here, in terms of whether there's a trade war, but plus there's another new wave of things coming in terms of sustainability standards and so forth, that we need to position ourselves. So the hard hit sectors will be the exporting sectors in this nature. So, and most importantly, those who are subjected to higher emission. Like if the CBAM comes in, then they have identified 5 sectors within the carbon emission sectors, like cement and so on. So these are sectors that need to be looked into. So I think there's a lot of discussion on energy transition in this manner. So I think it depends on how each of the countries are putting up their policies to transit. But what is weird is that we don't have feasible technology in some areas, but we are assuming that we will be able to transit given the technological progress in that nature. even the pledge that they did, that developed country has to finance some of these initiatives is not there yet. So we haven't received any of the money in that context. Yeah, so transition is a long way, especially for countries which are more resource-based, like Australia, for instance. Indonesia is important coal producer, and so forth. So I think they are looking at it in terms of transition journey rather than making quick change along the way.
Thank you for your response. Now, Professor Dai. 小 Professor 小太小的小。
Okay, thank you, Professor Chen and Professor Lin's comments and discussion, question for discussion. Because the time is limited, so I'd like to discuss with how to get it started. Yeah, you have a similar question. Yeah, it's just like I said. I think the most simple or most easy way is to join existing and very developed, very much, that's the EU ETS. And the EU actually welcome other countries to join EU ETS, such as Swiss joined EU ETS recently. Okay, that's very simple, because the system is well developed and functioning very well, and the penalty mechanism, that's a CBAM, will get started 2026. So that's the most easy way. But the cost is that there's no way to form a East Asia Climate Club. But the benefits of East Asia Climate Club, not for climate change, but for mitigating geopolitical tension in this region. If we can have East Asia Climate Club and it runs very well. Yeah, and of course it's very difficult because of political problem, but we have the same common benefits, that's mitigating climate change. And then the same goal, same benefits, then we just leave political differences aside. Just like EU was organized or set it up because of these 2 world wars in Europe. They want to avoid another world war in Europe. Here we like to avoid the death of human civilization, so we need to do that. That's but I just like I said, people are optimism, because they think that those risks will, I will be immune from those risks. Yeah, people saying, bad lucks. I will not run into the bad luck. Okay, that's the problem. But yeah, so okay, that's my.
Okay, finally, because now time is overdue, I would like to express my sincere thanks to our 5 distinguished panelists and discussants for your excellent presentation. Give us an inspiring and illuminating idea about the whole subject, and very appreciative for the 2 discussants. They offer very good response and comment, give us very contribute to our very successful final end. So now I'd like to conclude this afternoon. Panel 3 is ended. Thank you.